Wells Fargo conference.
As Roberto was saying, working with pivot tables is going to be the main part of what we're going over today. But before we get there, we're going to talk a little bit about tables. That might be something that you guys are familiar with. But I just want to recap it, and you guys might find those useful if you've never used them before. Excuse me. Also, we're going to be talking about customizing the Excel environment, so some time-saving tricks that you guys are going to end up liking and using. As far as how today is going to be run, I'll go through and I'll be sharing my desktop the entire time. I'll go through and demonstrate a lot of the topics that we're going to go through, and then I'll also give you guys an opportunity to try it on your own. And if you have any questions when we're going through any of that practice, just stop me. Let me know what your question is. I want you guys to all be on the same page and definitely get a lot of useful information out of this that's going to help you be a little bit more successful with Excel. So please feel free. This training is all about you guys, so let me know what I can do to help you out. Also, you guys should have on your desktop or on your computer a few different files, and a few of those files that we're going to be using. The first one is called tables.xlsx, and I'm going to open it up on my screen, and you guys can just watch at this point. And are you all able to see Excel, and it's large enough? Is anybody having any issues with that?
This is Robbie. It looks good to me, Brad.
All right, perfect.
Not here. Looks good.
So the first thing that we're going to talk about is just working a little bit with tables, and it's a quick and easy way to format and also do sorting and filtering and get quick totals. So this information right here, if I want to make it into a table, you just simply click one of the cells. You don't have to select all of them. Just click one cell, go to your Insert tab, insert it as a table. It's pretty smart. It'll grab where the information is located, and then there'll be a little checkbox. My table has headers. It makes an educated guess, and in this case, it does have headers, so I'll just click OK. And when I do that, I get this brand new tab up at the top of my screen called Table Tools Design. And if I click away from the table, the tab does disappear. You have to be on the table in order to see the Table Tools Design tab. So a couple things that it's going to do is format your table for you. And if you look over in the upper right up here, there's a few different table styles that I can check out. So we could go with maybe like a green theme or something like that for the Packers. And over towards the middle, there's going to be a few different checkboxes. If I deselect the header row, it'll actually get rid of my header up at the top, so I'll leave that one on. Banded rows is kind of nice because it'll shade every other row. The banded columns will do just the opposite, shade every other column. If you use them together, they kind of look like a checkerboard, so I would do just one or the other. Typically, banded rows is what we want. The total row is going to be something that's pretty useful as well. When you click it, row 19 illuminated, and that's a total row. On the far right, it just gave me a simple sum of my furthest right numerical column. But if I click on that cell, I actually get a drop down, and I can do over to grab a count or another quick sum. What's great about this little total row at the bottom is once I start going through and sorting and filtering my information, it treats it like a subtotal. So if I'm only going to look at 3M vendor products, all this information in the total row is only calculating what's being shown. And another feature that they upgraded from 03 to 07 is that when you're filtering, it's not going to have just a little blue icon here. It's actually going to show the filter icon. So it's a little bit more apparent what you're filtering by. And of course, I can click that and clear that out. And is there anybody that's not very familiar with sorting and filtering in a table? Probably something that we've done a lot.
Yeah.
The reason why, I'm sorry?
No, I just said, yeah, I was just agreeing.
Okay.
Yeah, familiar.
Gotcha. So the reason why I wanted to show you guys the table is because we're going to start talking about pivot tables. And when people hear pivot tables, it's one of those topics in Excel that we get a little scared of or because we're not familiar with. To work with tables, we can create tables from them that'll be drilling down to the details that we want. So what I'm going to do is just close up this file. and I'm going to open up a spreadsheet called shipping. And if you guys are looking for information in your book, there is information. It starts on page 30. And these books, you guys can use them as a great reference for later on. So for example, on 30, some information about creating tables. And if you were to look over on page 32, it'll walk you through how to do that topic. So everything that we're going to go over through these trainings, you can go back to your book and you have a great how-to procedure reference to use later on. And those books are yours, so if you guys want to keep them in a PDF, print them out, make notes, whatever's going to be most helpful, go ahead and do that. So this spreadsheet that I have up on my screen right now, it's just a tiny spreadsheet. It has a few thousand rows in it. So about 100 rows. So it's a pretty, look up at the top, this one's just dealing with a company that was sold to, the country in which they're located, who sold it, the order ID, when it was ordered, needed, shipped, and what the product was. Over on the right is the numerical columns. So we have the unit price, quantity, and then the extended is just a calculation of unit times quantity. So if I want to go through this spreadsheet and I have about 8 or 9 salespeople and I want to know how much each salesperson sold, you could go through and we could insert this as a table and filter out by each person. So go through all 8 or 9 of the salespeople and then calculate a sum for the extended price. And then copy and paste all that information and put it in a clean looking table. What's going to be a little bit easier than that, and by a little bit easier I mean it's going to take us about 2 seconds to calculate the information that we need. So if I click in any one cell just like how I was working with a table, I'm going to go over to Insert, and instead of working with a table, I'm going to click over on Pivot Table. When I do that, it's going to make an educated guess as to where the end of the table is at 2156, so it grabbed all the adjacent cells, and it's asking me where I want to put the pivot table at. Typically, putting it on a new worksheet.
Let me have you pause there for just a second, Brad. Is it refreshing properly on your screen, everyone? Because it's a little bit slow on mine. I just want to make sure that we're all able to follow along.
Yeah, it's fine for me.
Yeah, it's fine.
It's fine to me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. So typically, throwing it on a new worksheet is going to be the best option just because then you don't have to have a bunch of different information on a single worksheet and it gets a little confusing. So I'm just going to use the default options that it popped up with and click OK. When I do that, down at the bottom, I get a brand new sheet called Sheet 1, and I can click back over, and here's all my original information. So while I'm on Sheet 1, there's a pivot table placeholder over on the left, and as long as I'm clicked in there, my field list comes over on the right-hand side. If I click away, that'll disappear, and if I click back, it reappears. Up at the top, we have 2 more contextual tabs, and those are going to be Options and Design, and we're going to check those out in just a minute. All of these fields over here on the right were just grabbed at the top. So when you're looking to make a pivot table, it's best to think about what field you're going to need. So if I want to do one that has my salespeople and what their total extended price was, those are the 2 fields that I'm going to work with. So if I head back over to Sheet 1, I can go ahead and click the checkbox next to salesperson, and it'll go ahead and pop it down to the row labels in the bottom. The row labels are going to appear on the left-hand side, and it's going to take only the unique values. So what it did is it grabbed one of each salesperson. The second one I need is the extended price, so I'll just click that. Since it was a numerical field, it went ahead and put it into the values box in the bottom right down here. Over here in my pivot table, what it did is it went through and calculated for all the values and extended price for Andrew Fuller and gave me a sum. So right down here, it'll say sum of extended price. The only thing that I might do at this point is just make this look like currency. So just go to my Home tab and click the currency button. And that is all I need to do. We can make this look a little bit different if I wanted to have more of a landscape table instead of a portrait table. I can just take salesperson, left click and hold, and put it into the column labels. just going to reverse the order. So this way is probably not going to be very print friendly, and that's why Excel will by default put it into the row labels. What's also great about this pivot table is if I'm looking through, and Margaret Peacock here, she has $250,000 in sales, and I'd like to see how that price was calculated, I can double click on any one of those values and it'll open up a brand new sheet, and in that sheet it'll show me all the details of how it got that calculation. So this is basically a table that's been filtered out to show only Margaret Peacock in it. Once you're done with it, you are going to have to delete the sheet, so I'll just right click, delete the sheet, or you can leave it open if you don't want it. And I could also look and say, all right, Michael had a little bit lower, so I can go through and check out all of his extended prices. What's great about this too is if you look back over my invoices, none of this has been touched. So if I was to make this in a table or sort and filter the original information, it could be a little bit difficult, and I could have this in a certain order. So it's kind of nice that your original data is left as raw data. Back over in sheet, I'm sorry?
This is Joyce. I had a question. Can you, on the pivot table, can you have it do multiple calculations? In other words, you have the prices. Is there a way that you can have like another column where it tells you, based on the grand total, what percentage each person brought in?
What percentage of that? Yeah, you can add calculations to it.
Okay. But it would be, you have to do the calculation. Can you do it in, I see what you're doing. Okay, hold on. Oh, hold on.
Because we could add a new one. We could do a formula and create a calculated field. And then as long as we have the calculation, you'd be able to do that.
Okay.
And we are going to add a little bit more to this. So we're just keeping it basic for just a second here. So, and a little bit more that we can do with the pivot table is if I wanted to know how much each salesperson sold to each country, I can go ahead and add country. And if I just click the check mark next to country, it'll put it in the row labels as well. So it creates this expandable list where I can contract or expand through each salesperson. So I can see how much they sold by country, and it does provide a grand total by whatever the top one is up here. So since salesperson is on top of country, that's going to be the top level, country is second level. If I just left click and hold on country and move it up one level and drop it, now it'll be country with the grand total for each country and then broken down by the salesperson. This way is pretty print friendly. I could also create a crosstab report simply by grabbing country, left clicking and holding, and dragging it over to column. So right there, it'll give me a nice crosstab report. If you are going to print this over on the design tab, just like with tables, we can go through and select another design and give it a little bit of color. You can also do banded rows, so every other row is shaded, so it's a little bit easier to see on your screen and a little bit nicer to print out. Any questions that you guys have so far just about what we've done with pivot tables?
Just a note to let you know, if you haven't already figured it out, down on the bottom of the screen there is an area where you can click on your arrows or move over to the right a little bit so that you can see what Brad's doing to the right on the table.
You guys, hey, it's Tracy. Is this helpful or not? I mean, if we need to go back over, let's go back over. It's good. It's a good place to stop and ask questions.
Very helpful.
I agree.
Is it something that you guys
I need to practice, though. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's my thought, too. You go through it, watch it once, or, you know, and then you get in there and play with it, right?
Yeah.
And absolutely, and I totally agree with you, and I have another spreadsheet that I'm going to have you guys work on in just a few.
So can you show us what Joyce was asking in terms of, see, I know pivot tables pretty well, but I didn't realize you can actually create the the calculations. I've done it manually in the past.
Okay.
That would be really helpful.
Sure.
I think what's really helpful is the fact that you're using the latest, well, not somewhat latest 07 version.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much more user-friendly than the 03 version, and I just haven't had a chance to use this as much, but it's great.
It is a lot easier because they have everything that pops over on the right-hand side. And if you guys do get to use 2010, whether it's at work or at home, it looks just like it does in 2007, and then they added a new feature called a slicer, which is basically like a super filter. So that's really the only change from that version. So let's check out what Joyce was talking about, where you could create a new calculated field. So if I click over in my Options tab, in the Tools group, there's going to be a drop-down for formulas, and you can create a calculated field. So I could give it, just to do a little example, if I didn't have an extended price in here and I only had unit price and quantity, I could create a brand new field for that. And the formula, I can go through and say what that formula is going to be equal to. So I could say unit price multiplied by quantity. And when I do that, it'll create that field for me. So if you know what calculation that you're going to need, just by going to this drop-down, give it a calculated field. And then you could create one called percent of total, and then just insert the formula that's going to give you the percent of the total. Is that helpful?
It is. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And then you can type in here, but what I would recommend is just going through and double-clicking the fields that you need, so that way there's no error when you're going through. And then just use your operators like division, multiplication, subtraction, sum, or any of the other ones that you might need, exponents or anything like that.
And the calculated fields just stay on the summary. It doesn't add back to the raw data, right, in the other worksheet?
Absolutely, yeah. It's just this is never going to be touched by anything that we do in the pivot table.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
This is Rachel. I actually, you started to do the percent of total. I actually struggle with getting that to work. I'll do the formula, and then it just results in 0, or I get like an error. And I don't know if maybe it's not recognizing the total the right way, or maybe I don't have the total, but I always get stuck on that.
Gotcha. Yeah, so we can actually do it. So if we're going to do a calculated field, then we can do that percent of total. So we could say, and my math skills are amazing on a Monday morning. So you could grab this total down here and we could copy it.
So you can't do what you just showed us before and then come down to the drop-down menu and just put grand total?
Or
on the fields, is there a grand total option?
On the fields here, it's only going to be what's available in your original data.
Okay. So you actually have to type in your formula the actual grand total.
Yeah, so if you were to refresh your data and it would change, then you would have to go in and manually change that calculated field.
Oh, okay. I think that's where I get stuck. Okay.
Okay, I get it.
All right. So let's check out just a few other things that we're going to do with this pivot table. And that is working with the report filter. So if I wanted to keep my salesperson report and have just my salespeople and my sum of unit price, I could take company name and left click and hold, drag it into report filter. And when I do that up in A1 and B1, it'll go ahead and put a filter in there. So I could say I only want to see this company, click OK, and then it's being filtered out by this company. If you need to do multiple ones, you can click select multiple items and go through and click all of them that you're going to need and click OK. If this is something that you're going to print out, I would maybe write down the things that you're filtering by somewhere over on the right-hand side, because the drop-down is going to say multiple items. So it doesn't actually spell out until you click it. So if you printed, you might not know exactly what it was calculating. If we click all again, it'll go ahead and take us back to everything. And if I don't want this report filter here anymore, I can grab the report filter, left-click and hold on it, and just drag it over to the left until I see an X. Release it, and it'll go ahead and throw it out of the pivot table. And that's true with anything that you're working on in a pivot table. You can simply hit the checkbox, and it'll pop it into one of the four. Typically, if it's a non-numerical column, it'll pop it into the row labels, and if it's a numerical one, it'll want to put it into the values. So when I go through and design pivot tables, typically you'll put something in the row labels, also something in the values. If you want to create a crosstab, you'll put something up here in the column labels so that they go across the top of your pivot table. And then if you need to get down to specific information, go ahead and put in a report filter. Once you have all that information in there, you can always double click to see how it made that calculation. And it just takes you to a drill down table where you can see the details. Any questions about just kind of working with pivot tables, anything that we've gone over so far that you had a question about, or anything that was extremely helpful so far?
Go ahead, Rachel.
One of the things that I think I figured out how to do, but I was sort of struggling, is if you want to show the results by month or by quarter or by year without having to have separate columns in your raw data for quarter and year. Does that make sense? Like you can group
Gotcha.
the data.
Gotcha, yeah. So what we could do is, so we're kind of like how this data right here, it's just an actual date. It's not actually broken into a particular quarter or anything like that.
Right. So how do you show a pivot table that reflects that data by quarter?
So let's put the order date in there. And what you could do is go, when you have a date in there, you can use the drop down, and the date does allow you to go through and filter out by a quarter or a month or anything like that. As far as breaking it down a little bit more, you know what,
There's like a function where you can, and I can't remember where it is, where it puts, like if you did it by month, you can say January, February, March, April, and then it puts it in the right order, and then you can also choose to show it by quarter. So instead of January, it's going to say Q1 2000, whatever. But if you don't know, that's fine. We can go on to.
And I'm going to be sending you guys out an email right after class this afternoon, and it'll have an evaluation, and anything that we don't go over in class, I can put that information in there. So I'll make a note right now, and I'll figure that out for you.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank
put
you.
That in there. No problem. Absolutely. All right. Was there any other questions that you guys had? I think there was one other person that had something.
That was going to be me, and I was going to ask if once you have certain data in here, can you do subtotals of that data? I've always had trouble where it says I can't subtotal certain things.
So going through and grouping it a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. Because you can go through and group things manually if you wanted using your data tab, but as far as getting subtotals in there, And you know what, Rachel, your question right here, the group field, it's on the options.
Okay.
Right now I'm clicked on the date field. If I click group field, we could do orders. And then that'll go ahead and
yeah, okay.
orders. So that's right there. So on options, group field. And then we can go through and say maybe years. And that's what you were looking for, right?
Yep, that is. Thank you.
Perfect. And as far as subtotals go, that would give you a subtotal 2 for each one of those quarters. So depending on how you wanted to group it, you could select or deselect the ones that you want, how you want to group it together.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely. Was there any other questions that you guys had so far before we move a little bit more forward? So once we go through and we insert the fields and we're happy with the way the report looks, what's nice about it is we can still go back to our original data and continue adding stuff to it. When we go back over to our sheet 1, where our first pivot table is, if you want to refresh your data, just hit the refresh button, and it's going to look at the same exact cells that you had before and refresh it if there's any new information in there. If you start to add rows, though, what I would do is just click over where it says Change Data Source. And when you grab it, it'll typically grab the few new rows that you added, and I would just verify by looking down at the bottom and then just hit OK. So refresh is going to look.
Because I've always started all over again.
If you do, I'm sorry?
I said that was good to know because I've added rows, I couldn't figure that out, and I would start all over again.
Absolutely. And you would think that the refresh button would be smart enough to go through and go, oh, here she added 3 rows. It doesn't. It just looks at the same exact cells, and then if anything changed in those cells. So,
okay, good.
Yeah, just change data source, and it usually grabs the new rows for you, so you can just look down at the bottom, and you're pretty much okay with just clicking OK. Another thing that typically happens with pivot tables is if how I was clicking away, that field list disappears, and when I click back over, it reappears. If we wanted to show somebody something on our screen and we X out this little field list, if I click away or come back, it still isn't there. So where you can find that is on the Options tab when you're clicked on your pivot table, and you'll see Field List, and if you click that, it just brings it back. The field list is going to be essential to creating it because that's what's going to allow you to move things around or change the structure. Also up at the top on your Options tab, there's going to be a few sort tools that you can work with. So if I wanted to sort extended price field, I can just hit the A to Z sort or descending sort. You can also do a multi-level sort if you have a few columns that you want to try and sort by. All right. One other thing, too, is by default, whenever you put something into the values column, it's going to create a sum of that. So if you were looking for more of an average or a count, you can click on over in the values, the drop-down, and value field setting is going to be the last option. And this is where you can go through and choose what kind of calculation you want to do. So instead of a sum, I could go through and say, let's do an average. Click OK, and then it'll go ahead and do an average of extended price. To get it back to go back and choose sum. That window I was just on is also a way that you can go through, and this might be a way to maybe do a percentage of. So if we go back in there. And the grand totals, let's do extended price. And it's not in there. So it looks like we would have to do a manual calculation for that percent of total. Any questions though working with just the functionality of your field list or working with the value field settings, or anything that we've gone over? Is this something that you guys are excited to try out?
Sure are.
All right, perfect. For a second, it was just dead air. I was worried.
Everyone was on mute.
Gotcha, okay. So, just your workbooks, so we'll have a tab with our raw data in there, and then sheet 1, we could go ahead and we could, if this was a report that we were going to pull every so often, we could just call that quarter totals. And if I need to create multiple pivot table reports in here, I can just go back to my invoice sheet, click on one cell, go to Insert, Pivot Table, grabs all my information, put it on a new worksheet, and you can have as many different pivot tables as you're going to need. That was also something that's kind of an advantage over the 03 version, is the way that it saves the files in the XLSX version, which is in 2007 and 2010. It's going to save it in a lot smaller file size. So if you had a 5 megabyte spreadsheet in 2003, that same exact spreadsheet is likely to be half the size, so maybe 2 or 2.5 megabytes in 07. And you also have gone from 65,000 rows to over 1 million per sheet. So we can go through, create as many different ones as we're going to need, just rename the tabs, whatever that report's going to be called, and then when you open it up and you change any of the raw data, just go through, hit refresh or change the data source and grab new ones. So just remember, refresh is going to relook at the information. This will actually be if you added information to it. So
Quick question. If you have multiple pivot tables in one worksheet, when you refresh, it'll refresh for all tabs, or just the tab that you were working in?
It treats each one as a separate piece. So when I click inside of this one and I hit refresh, it's only going to affect just this one pivot table.
Okay. Thanks.
So even if I had 3 different pivot tables on this sheet alone, depending on which one I was actually clicked on, when I went up to the options tab, it would only affect that one. So if you had 5 on one sheet, it wouldn't matter. So that's kind of nice too, because maybe you might not want to refresh all of them. You might just want to refresh the one that you're working on.
Okay, good to know.
Well, any other questions that you guys had so far? All right. Second thing we're going to take a peek at before I get you guys started on an activity is over on page 38, and that's working with a pivot chart. So I'm just going to make this one a little bit easier to look at. We're going to go back to that first report that I created where it was fill and some points. Once I have this information in here, I might want to put it into a PowerPoint as a chart. What I can do is go over to my Options tab and click on Pivot Chart. I'm just going to do a basic column chart. And what it's going to do is create a chart based upon what's inside of that pivot table. When you are inside of the pivot chart, you get this floating toolbar right here, and this allows you to go through and filter out by any information that you might need. So I would think of this drop-down as the same thing as this drop-down over here. So if I was looking and I said, all right, I only want to see these few people, just click OK, and it'll go ahead and change on the side of my pivot table. Just like any other chart that you guys would work with, though, up at the top you're going to get a few tabs. The Design tab allows you to go through, change the style a little bit. So these dark background ones look good in a PowerPoint, not so good for printing. Paper gets a little wrinkly. Over on the search subtract elements chart. So if you wanted to get rid of a title, you could click None. If you want to bring it back, you can choose to have it overlaid or above the chart. You can work with your Access titles. You can take your legend away, put it on the right, and move it to wherever you might need it. You can also take it and move it around manually as well if you need to. The data labels, that'll go ahead and we can say outside end, and it'll put the values for each bar in there. You can also throw a data table below the information, and that's basically just taking the information and putting it into a little table so you can see the exact values. Can sometimes dirty it up a little bit. Over towards the right, you guys are going to see a trend line. So if you had something that was going to be applicable, so this one really wouldn't be a good one to put a trend line in, but you can go ahead and say, let's do a linear trend line. And it would go ahead and put that in there, and you can also remove it. On the Format tab, this one's going to be the one that you will use to, because design will do it for you. But you can click on one of your bars, it'll grab all of them in that series, and you can change the particular color to one that you want. The Analyze tab is the one that you won't have when you're working with just a regular chart. It's only there if you're working with pivot charts. And that's where we can go ahead and refresh the data. We can grab our field list, and also the pivot table or the pivot chart filter. So it's just that floating bar up here. So that just allows us to go through and work with our access fields and filter out to get the information we want. So it's just a quick way once we build a pivot table to go ahead and visually display that data. And is working with charts something that you guys are familiar with in 2007?
Yes.
It is? Okay, perfect. So what I'd like to do is to have you guys practice a little bit with working with these pivot tables. So if you guys could, and for this part you guys don't need to see my screen, but I'd like you to go ahead and minimize the screen and open up the inventory XLS X.
Which one?
When you get inventory, and when you guys get that open, you should see store, product, part number, and it's about 32 rows of information. And once you guys get that open, on page 134, there's going to be an activity there. And I want you guys just to spend a few minutes going through. You can use the instructions as a guideline, but feel free to play a little bit, trial and error, and work with creating pivot tables and modifying them. And as you guys are going through, we'll give you about 5 to 10 minutes to work on this, and then we'll go over it together. But if you have questions, please just let me know as you're going through it, and I'll be available to help you out.
And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and pause the virtual classroom. So if you have a question, please just verbally indicate you have a question, and then we'll restart the recording so that we can capture that question and response.
To get back to the, which part of it though?
Yes, if I'm clicked on one of the items in the pivot table and I want to see the data source, what is it that I...
Gotcha. If you want to see where the data source is for the pivot table?
Yes.
So if you click on the pivot table and then up at the top you'll see the contextual tab, pivot table tools, and then options below. Yes. About halfway through you're going to see change data source. Okay. And if you click on the top half of that button, it'll show you where it's grabbing the data from.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Is there any other questions so far that you guys are having?
So for the third one, I was just playing around and I wanted to see, so it has, on the right side, I have a grand total. So I have it filtered by store location, by vendor, and then the grand total. So on the bottom there's a grand total, and then on the column on the right side there's a grand total. How do I change that grand total value to be a percentage versus an amount?
Okay, so let me set it up to there. So we've got product, store, and units on hand. Changing labels to vendor. And then the next one was sum the unit price rather than the available units. All right. And you're talking about the grand total over on the right column for for the vendor, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you want it to be a percentage or
right.
And a percentage of
the grand total.
The grand total? Because the grand totals are going to be, if you are on your pivot table and you go over to the design view,
mm-hmm.
there is a drop-down right there for the grand totals. And you can, this is just turning them on or off, so you could turn it off. What you might want to try is creating, to get the percentage, is to do a new calculated field. So if you turn off the grand total and then create a new calculated field underneath the options tab and then towards the far right where it says calculated field, then you could create a formula that would get the percentage. But as far as an automatic quick percentage, the grand total is just going to allow you to take the straightforward total.
Again, to insert the formula, I just click, where do I click on the pivot table?
You can click anywhere in the pivot table, and then once you go over to the options tab, you can create the formula, and then once you create the calculated field, it'll put it into your field list, and then you can pick up that field and drop it in either row labels or column labels.
Oh, okay.
So when you're in the pivot table to add a calculated field, you go to options, is that right?
Yep, so click right on the pivot table and then up at the top, click the options tab. And then towards the far right of that tab, you're going to see formulas, and then calculated field is the first one in that drop down.
Got it, okay, great.
And then you just give it a name and then just put the formula below it. All right, are you guys just about ready to go over this together?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. If you guys would like, if you could bring me back up. So if you bring back your screen share. We're going to take a look, and in front of you guys should see just the basic raw data. So if I go to just click one cell, you can go through and actually select all of them if you want. And if you guys go through, typically we go to the upper left and we drag down to the bottom right. And if there's a lot of data that can kind of take you a while, if you guys are looking for a quick keyboard shortcut, you can jot this down. If you click the upper left cell and then hold Control-Shift on your keyboard, while holding Control and Shift, hit the right key and then the down key, it'll grab all the adjacent cells in that range.
Great trick. I never knew that.
Say that again, because I like that too.
Absolutely.
I'm going to write this down.
Absolutely, because if you guys are doing like a formula at any point in Excel, or you're just trying to do a formatting change, click the. So right now I just clicked A1, and now on my keyboard I'm going to hold Control and Shift. While holding Control and Shift, hit the right key and hit the down key. So when you go right, it'll grab all the cells to the right, and then when you go down, it'll grab all of them to the bottom of the selection. All right. So once we go through and grab one of the cells, or if you guys like the Control Shift right down trick, we can go to Pivot Table, verify that it grabbed all the cells that we needed, and we're going to put it on a new worksheet. Once we're on the new sheet, we're going to grab Product for Row Labels, so I can just left click and drop it into the Row Labels bucket. And we're going to grab Store for column label, and then what's going to fill in the body of the table and the values is going to be units on hand. And remember, it puts the sum automatically in there by default, so if you guys do need to change it to an average, value field settings, and then choose average, max, min, count, whatever it is that you're going to need. You can also customize the name here as well. And if you need to change any of these names up here where it just says row label or column label, you can click inside of there, and instead of it saying row label, I could go ahead and say product. The only thing to remember if you do change it from column or row labels to something else, if I change out row labels now and put vendor in there, it still says product. So it's going to remember whatever I renamed row labels to be. So now I would have to manually change it and say vendor. So if this is going to be a pivot table that you guys are going to keep going back to and just refreshing, and you're not going to change the row or column labels, then I would actually just type over where it says row label or column label. For the last one that we're going to do up there, we're going to change our pivot table around a little bit, and we're going to have the sum of the unit price rather than the available units. We're going to grab unit price or unit on hand, throw it over to the left, grab unit price, and drop it into the values. What can kind of be helpful when you guys are going to create a pivot table is either visualize the way that you want it to look, or either draw a little drawing on a scrap piece of paper and just think of the columns that you're going to need from your original data and the way that you want it to be arranged. And remember, typically, row labels is the first place you're going to put something. Then values is going to be the actual data that you want to see. And then if you're going to create a crosstab report, you're going to put something up here in the column labels. I always kind of say when you're working with pivot tables, people like to think they're complicated, but really you're just going to treat it like a first grader. You're going to grab it, one of the fields up at the top, and drop it into one of the 4 buckets. And if you're not sure which bucket to put it in, just click the checkbox, and it makes a pretty good guess as to where it should go. Any closing questions that you guys have working with pivot tables? Are you excited to check it out and use it with your own data? Is it going to be useful?
I think so.
Well, for me.
Yeah, good.
Great, perfect. All right, I'm going to leave the spreadsheet open that I have, and we're actually going to work a little bit with customizing the Excel environment. And if you guys are looking in your Level 2 PDF book, information starts on page 110. And you guys have probably been using 07 for a little while now. And have you guys seen the Quick Access toolbar that's at the top up here, where it has the save, go back, and forward up here? If you need to add anything to this Quick Access toolbar, you can click this little black drop down, and if I print preview a lot, I can add that up here, and then I can quickly grab it. This is the only spot that you guys are going to find the undo button and the redo button too. So go through and add all the Quick Access ones that you're going to need, and what I would even suggest is this last option, or second to last option rather, says show below the ribbon. If I click that, it's going to move it from the title bar up at the top to just below the ribbon, so it's pretty close to my workspace. If you're going through, any button that you guys click often, you can add simply by right-clicking it and adding it to the Quick Access toolbar. So if I go to
great tip.
Definitely. So if you insert pictures often, just go to Insert Picture, right-click it, add to Quick Access toolbar, and then it's always going to be here. This Quick Access toolbar is not document specific, it's application specific. So I can open up any Excel files, and this Quick Access toolbar is going to be the same on my computer. If I open up Microsoft Word, I'm going to do it for Word, I'm going to do it for PowerPoint, and do it for Outlook. So just set it up once per application, and then as you're going through, you go, you know what, I've clicked this button here 3 or 4 times today. Why don't I just right-click and add it to my Quick Access toolbar? So that way, it's always right here for me. You can go all the way across to the right, and when you do, it knocks down to a second row. But it's not called the Quick Access toolbar anymore. It's just called Annoying Really Long Toolbar. And it just becomes a little cumbersome to find something. So usually keeping it one row is a little bit easier. And if you guys have a laptop and it has a smaller screen, this ribbon up here can take up a lot of real estate. So what you might want to try is if you right-click anywhere in the ribbon, minimize the ribbon, it'll go ahead and minimize it. So now it gives it that 2003 feel where if I click, it shows my options, and then when I click down here, it disappears. If you need to get it back, just right-click, check, minimize the ribbon, and it'll go ahead and lock it back in. So a lot of people, what they'll do is go through and grab the stuff that they use most often, put it on the Quick Access toolbar, and then they minimize the ribbon, and then they have a lot more screen space to see more information. So definitely utilize the Quick Access toolbar, set it up for all the Microsoft products that you guys work with, and it should save you a little bit of time because sometimes you forget where something's located. And when it's right in front of you, it's going to make it a lot easier. The customized part that I'm going to check out now is if I go to the Office button in the upper left, this is basically your file menu. So if I click that, in the bottom right, it's going to say Excel Options. This button in Microsoft Word, it'll just say Word Options, PowerPoint, PowerPoint Options. So it's basically the control panel for that program. When I click it, it opens up this window, and there's a few that we're going to take a look at. One is going to be the color scheme, and there's 3 options, blue, silver, and black. Blue is the default for 07. If I choose black, it'll go ahead and just change the way the program looks. One thing to know is once you change it for one program, it changes it for all of them. So if I was to open up my Outlook right now, it would be in black as well. So just kind of change the way it looks. And sometimes silver and blue are a little bit too light, where the black theme might be a little bit more higher contrast for you, especially on a laptop if it has a LCD screen that can be a little bit hard to see. Right below there, still on this Popular tab, it says when creating new workbooks. These are your default options here. So when you guys open up Excel, you're going to have 3 sheet default. Calibri is going to be your font, and size 11 is what you're going to be looking at. If you guys always go in there and you change something to Times New Roman size 12, I would just go up here, choose Times New Roman size 12, and then when you click OK, you've just set the default for Excel. The view that you're going to look at, normal view, is where we can see all of our cells in one sheet, and that's typically the view that you guys like to work in to edit. There's also the page break and the page layout. And those look, page layout shows you what each sheet's going to look like when it gets printed, and then page break preview allows you to grab this blue line and show what's going to print on what page. So I would say for the default, normal is probably the most common option. That's why it's in there, the default. Over on the left, the second button is going to be for formulas, and this allows you to go through and choose when the calculation options are going to happen. So usually we won't want to touch these, and you want automatic workbook calculation. Under proofing, these are your spell check options. Probably something that you would use more in the other programs, but it just allows you to go through and customize what's going to happen during the spell check. This one you guys might want to change when you get back to your own computer. So when I go to save a document for the first time, and I go to File, Save, it usually defaults to the My Documents folder or somewhere else. Usually what we do is we want to save something to a server or a folder, and usually you guys like to go in and save documents to the same location. So if you find yourself going to File, Save, and then you have to click on the server, then click on another folder, then click on another folder, what you can do is say what the default file location is going to be for when you save something for the first time. So I can go through here and write in the file path, and once I do that, it's going to default to that folder for now and in the future. If you look, there's no Browse button over here, and that's because they actually put it inside of Microsoft Word. So if I open up Word for just a second, and I go to that same spot inside of Microsoft Word, so File, Options, Save on the left-hand side, there is a Browse button inside of Microsoft Word, and if I set it here, and I say I want to save everything to my desktop, and click OK, and then OK, it'll go ahead and feed that information over to Microsoft Excel. And I might have to close down Word, and it'll lock it in there. So set it up in Word, and it'll go ahead and transfer over to PowerPoint and Excel for you. There's also another option up here. You can set your auto recover for any type of time frame. So if you ever had your computer crashed or something happened, auto recover can save you. One other thing is save files in this format. If you guys are constantly saving files as a 97 to 2003, you can set that as your default. I would recommend saving stuff in the XLS, which is just the Excel workbook. And it's the newest file format, and it's going to allow you to use all the new features that are in 07. On the Advanced tab, a couple that you might want to check out is after pressing Enter, move selection down. You can actually choose Enter to move to the right if you prefer to move to the right. When you're in your spreadsheets, when you hit Tab, it'll move it over to the right, and when you hit Shift-Tab, it moves it over to the left. And when you hit Enter, it moves it down, and Shift-Enter moves it back up. So you can use those buttons as well. So there is quite a few options. Most of these I would leave as the default options, but there are a few, such as after pressing Enter, you might want to change that. On the Customize, this is where you can change the order of how things show up on your Quick Access toolbar. So you can't pick up things and drag them on your Quick Access, but what you can do is click over here and move the buttons up that you use the most so that they appear on the left-hand side. You can also move commands that are over here onto your Quick Access toolbar. So if there was a feature that you guys liked or that you used in 2003 and you can't seem to locate where it is in 2007, if you click the drop-down and go to All Commands, this is every single command that Excel can do. And a lot of these didn't make the cut to show up in the ribbon. So there was a few features inside of 03 that people think are deleted once they go into 2007, and really they're just being hidden underneath all commands, and then you have to add them to your Quick Access toolbar. One other one is the Trust Center, and if you guys ever work with macros, this is where you can manage what the Trust Center settings are. So sometimes macros can contain viruses, so that's why you have a Trust Center. One last thing before we get out of here is I'm going to go back up to the Excel options and click on the Popular tab, which is the default tab that you land on. And there's the third check, the Develop ribbon. When I click this and I click OK, you get a brand new tab in your ribbon called Developer. And if you ever have to work with macros, whether you're just using them or if you want to record them, you have to enable the Developer toolbar, and then you can use all the macros that you need. So you can record easily. You can go into Visual Basic and actually write one. So typically, the easiest thing to do is just record a macro. And I believe there's one point we're going to be talking about that later on in a few weeks. Any questions, though, taking a look at these Excel options? The one that I would maybe work with is to go into Word and just change the default file location, so that way you don't have to click through every time you need to save something to a special folder. So was there any questions that you had?
Quick question.
Absolutely.
For the Options tab where the changes are universal, will they always default in all the other programs?
They do. For the color scheme is one of those things, and the macro settings are. For the most part, one other thing that is common between them is the Proofing tab. So when you go through and you change an autocorrect option, it's going to feed it to Word and it's going to feed it to PowerPoint, and also with the save.
Okay.
The default options, like what font you're using, that's going to just be for that application.
Got it.
Any other questions that you guys had? All right. So I'm just going to, if you want to make a note, I'm going to go over to page 114 inside of your PDF, and we're going to talk a little bit about comments and hyperlinks. So I'm just going to close down this file. I'm actually just going to close it from here. And I'm going to open up billing statement and take a look at this one. So comments are something that you guys might have used before, and what it is just a virtual sticky note that you can put a little bit of information in there about. So if I needed to put in a note inside of one of these cells, I can click on the cell, go to my Review tab, choose New Comment, and it's going to grab my name, and I can go ahead and make a little note in there. When I click it away, it's going to have this little red icon, and when I hover over the cell, I don't even need to click on it. It'll show what the comment is. And if you're curious as to where it's grabbing my name from, if I go to File, Excel Options, whatever you have typed here in the username is what it's going to grab. If I need to delete this note later on, I can click in that cell, go up to my Delete button, and delete it. You can also go through and show and hide all comments. So if I need to see every comment in here, just click Show All Comments, and they will all pop up. So I'm going to delete that one out. You can also click Next and Previous, and that'll walk you through all the comments that you have in this particular sheet.
Can you hide the comments from other people, but just, if you're going to send a spreadsheet so that they can't see it if they click on there?
Good question, Joyce.
To hide just certain comments from certain people?
In other words, if I have comments on, and maybe not certain people, but let's say I do an Excel spreadsheet and I want to send it out to my team, but I have comments in it, I don't want them to see those comments. Or selected ones. Is there a way to do that?
For Excel, the comments are pretty basic, so it's kind of an all or nothing. So you're going to see all the sticky notes or you're going to see no sticky notes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. If you're using Word and you're using comments or tracking changes, then you can filter out inside of Word, but Excel doesn't really allow you to do that. All right. One other thing that we're going to check out as well is inserting hyperlinks. So if I want to put in a hyperlink that's going to open up another document, you can go to Insert, and hyperlink is going to be about a little over halfway. So if I click on that, it'll open up this text box. And what it allows me to do is go through my computer and find the file that I want to open. So for this billing statement, I want to have a link where somebody can grab department numbers so they can put it in there easily. So if I click department numbers, it shows the address as that particular document, and then the text to display up at the top, I can say click to view department numbers. When I click OK, it'll go ahead and put that hyperlink in there. When I click it, it'll take a second. And it should open up Microsoft Word. All right. A few other things that you can do with hyperlinks is if I go back to inserting another hyperlink, over on the left-hand side is where I can put in an existing file or web page. So I went through and I grabbed this Word document. If you want, down at the bottom, you can actually just type in and if I wanted to create a little hyperlink to go to any type of a website or some type of page of interest, just put in the address here. And if you click the drop-down, it'll have a history of pages that you've gone to recently. And then just change the text at the top. So this is a quick way, too, that you can create a hyperlink and open up a certain web page. Just a couple other things, too, with it is if you have named cells inside of your document, you can call out those cells and click to go to a certain area. You can also say cell names such as G25, and it'll jump to that cell. So it creates a link to go to that particular spot. Another one that might be useful is you can put in an email address link, and when you click it, it'll open up Outlook. Whatever email address you typed in up here will be in the to line, and whatever you type in the subject will be the default subject line. So you can create a contact spreadsheet, and then you can actually just create links to open up an actual email to those people. Any questions or other uses that you guys have used hyperlinks for in the past or that you can think of that you might use them for in the future? All right. One of the last things that we're going to talk about today, and this is over on page 126 inside of your PDF for level 2, is working with templates. So if I go to File New, inside of this dialog box, I can search for any type of a template that I might need from Microsoft Online and download it to my computer. Over on the left, there's quite a few templates, and most of us have used a template at some point or another just to kind of give us a direction. There is one over here called My Templates, and when you click that, it'll show different templates that you have on your computer. So what I'm going to do is just create a blank workbook and just create a very simple template. So if I wanted to maybe put a couple pictures in there too. When I go to File, Save, right below here where it says Save as Type, what I'm going to do is click that drop down and you'll see Excel Template. When you click Excel Template, the default file location actually changes to your templates folder. So what I'm going to do is just call this example address template. And when I click Save, and I'm going to close that file out, when I go to File New and click on My Templates, I'll now see it in the My Templates folder. So it's just a quick way to do a file save as, save it as a template, and use that later on. So when I open this up, I'll go ahead and have it, and the default name up here is just whatever I called the template with a 1 after it. If you open up another one, it says 2, and then you just go to File Save and save your documents. Just a couple other little minor changes that you can work with. And I'm going to go back to the tables that we were working with earlier. If you guys recall when we were working with pivot tables or tables, when we were in the design, there was all these options to choose from here. The reason why it's grabbing this particular color scheme here is because it's relying upon the color palette that's right here. So if I go to Page Layout, Colors, Office is going to be the default, and it's just a palette of colors. If I choose a different palette, like let's say Verve, when I go back to my design, all the table styles are going to reflect that new style change. So now I have a whole new selection of colors to look at. Also, on my Home tab, all the colors for the font options follow that same exact color scheme. So on your page layout, when you have that color drop-down, this is going to affect table colors, chart colors, and also font colors. So that default, again, it is the Office one, but you can go through and check out the different ones. This is the reason why this is actually pretty useful is because you have the ability to create your own theme colors. So if I click that drop down and go to create new theme colors, I could call this Wells Fargo and go through and select each and every color that's going to be available in there. So what hyperlinks are going to look like. Maybe I want them to be red. After you click on them, I want them to be blue. So as you go through and you choose all your accent colors and you can click more colors, you can create this customized theme. And when I do that, it'll show it in the custom, and that'll be my new default from now on. So if you have certain colors that you have to work with, whether you're in PowerPoint, Word, or Excel, if you create a color palette in any one of those programs, you'll have it available in the other ones.
Can you create customized palettes based on the brand requirements? So, for instance, certain blues are made of a combination of numbers.
Yeah, so when I go into, let's say this color right here, if I could put more colors on the customize, it allows you to go through and there's a red, green, blue. So if you have a number, you can just go through there, and if it was for red, 85, for green, 15, and 90 for blue, it'll grab that color purple. So that's exactly what they were thinking when they designed this was you have a color palette and you have all these hexadecimal colors that you have to adhere to, so it allows you to create that color palette.
And can you do that in PowerPoint and Word as well?
Absolutely. And once I do it in this program and I save this document, that color theme will be available in Word and PowerPoint as well.
Right.
So if you created one in
Regina, those the colors that the standard brand colors. If you have that PowerPoint template, it actually has those defined on that template, or I'm sure at the brand website too. But they're all defined there, which is great.
Yep. This way we don't have to keep going in and manually.
Exactly. I think this is awesome. This will save me a lot.
Finding that color red or that color yellow that you need. Exactly.
Yeah.
Does that also have any effect on the colors that will populate for your graphs and charts?
It does, absolutely. Whenever I choose a color palette from over here, if I was to go in and insert a chart, underneath design, the colors that are available here are dependent upon what I chose over here in my color palette.
Oh, okay.
So if I go, so if you do create or if you open up that PowerPoint that has the Wells Fargo and you save it to your machine, then you can go through and use that same color scheme for your tables, your charts, all those objects in your sheets.
Okay, because sometimes some odd colors pop up when you do those. And then I go in, I mean, there's other ways of changing the color, but if you had a palette, it would be much easier.
Absolutely, yeah, and I definitely recommend the palette just so you can go in here and then you have all the colors that you want. So you don't have those weird colors that you don't really use. You go in here and it's everything that you actually want.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions that you guys had so far with just kind of customizing that environment? So a couple things that I would just maybe put as things to do later today even is go through, customize that quick access toolbar. This is the number one thing that you can do to really save time inside of these programs. So learn, set it up so that way you're very quick on your own computer and you can go through and grab the things that you need most. You're not going to waste time up here and click through. Find that PowerPoint that has that color scheme in there, and then you'll be able to use the color scheme in other applications as well. As far as hyperlinks, those are a great time saver. So going through and inserting a hyperlink, whether to another spreadsheet or another Word document or anything, can save you time. One thing to remember, though, about the spreadsheets is if I was linking to this particular document, if I was to send that my one spreadsheet to you, would you be able to click the link to go to the other document? And you wouldn't, because it's going to look at that file path and it's going to tie it to my computer. So when you're doing hyperlinks to documents, make sure it's in a location that's going to be universal, like a server. So that way when you send that document to somebody else, they're able to go through and grab it by just clicking the hyperlink. It's not going to show it as a broken link. So unless it's just going to be you that's using it, make sure that it's going to be in a public place that the other person's going to have access to as well. All right. Any other questions that you guys have about stuff that we've gone over so far today? Are you finding it useful, or is there any other things that you wanted to know about pivot tables or about working in the environment a little bit?
This is Robbie. I found it helpful. What other comments or anything do we have for Brad?
I think what would be helpful, I guess, to spend a little bit more time, maybe, I know we have another session scheduled, but in pivot tables, there's things like the value field settings, show value as, there's different options there, and I'm not quite sure how it handles the data and how it can be used.
Okay.
So I think I guess spending more time on the actual calculations within pivot tables and some of the things you can do differently.
Okay.
I'm still struggling a little bit with the calculated field to get it, I guess, to do what it is that I'm trying to do.
And then if I can also add, and I'm hoping I'm not the only one because I know I've struggled with this before, but in a table, when you have, what's the term, lookups, or no, not lookups, when you have a drop-down selection menu, when you select one, all subsequent menus to the right are only pulling from related items tying back to that first selection. Does that make sense?
Okay, so when you have a drop-down menu to choose from, so if we had...
And there's a drop-down selection in each column. I would like to tie back the drop-down selections from the subsequent columns back to that one in the first column. So for instance, there's 20 regions, and we select Desert Mountain. All subsequent selections to the right are tying back to that Desert Mountain region, so it could be AU, it could be divisions or whatnot.
Okay, so for example, in this little drop down here, so if I chose red, you're saying that these cells off to the right, you want to be equal to this information?
So red would be defined as, let's say, Greater Bay, San Jose. So red is defined by a certain category, or it's a category defined by different products or topics.
Okay.
And so when you then select something to the right, it would always tie back to that root color or selection. And I may need to talk to you about that offline just so it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. And the session that probably would be most useful too, because we are going to go over data validation, and that's going to be in session 3.
Okay.
So if it's something too, you can also email me, and you could even throw attach an example of what you're talking about too.
Okay, great.
Maybe before that class, we can go over it, because it seems like it might be helpful to other people as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and send out a session outline just to remind everybody what is included in each session. So today is session 1, and then obviously subsequently we'll just go in sequential order with the additional dates that we have outlined. So if you see anything on here that you don't see something that's not on here that you want to have added, please let me know, and I'll work with Brad to get that added. But
absolutely.
Thank you.
I'll send that out.
So just to kind of go over a little bit what we've talked about today. So when we were going in there and you guys just wanted to work with just a simple table, you can go to click on the information, do insert table, and insert it as a simple table. I actually use this feature sometimes just for the formatting of it, just because it makes it easier to look at on the screen. But you do get the total row, which is pretty nice, and the quick sort and filter. If you guys do have a table and you want to remove the functionality of the table, such as not having that dynamic total row at the bottom, you can go up and convert to range, which is on the design tab. It'll say, are you sure? Yes, I'm sure. It leaves the coloring behind, but the functionality of the dynamic total row at the bottom, it doesn't let me click through it anymore. And it can't sort and filter. Also, with pivot tables, just click on one of the cells, insert as a pivot table, or if you guys like that, Control-Shift, hit the right key, and then hit the down key, and that grabs that whole selection. And I can insert a pivot table. Use your field list, pick up and drop and drag into the places that you're going to need them. If you're not sure, just click, and it usually will populate either into the row labels or the values, depending on if it's numeric or non-numeric. With those calculations, too, if you guys need to go through and there's not quite the calculation that you need, so it's a little bit more in-depth than just a simple sum of a unit price, as long, or what you can do is go to that formula, so options, calculated field, and you can go through there, give it a customized name, and so we could say part number divided by, and you can put in another field, put in a hard number, and then as soon as you click OK, it'll add that, and you can go ahead and click it and put it in there either as a field with a column label, a row label, or in the values if you want it to be calculated that way. So using some of those, it can make your life a little bit easier. If you go over to the Design tab, a couple things you might want to look at are the styles, so make it look a little bit more appealing, and then also working with totals, so showing them or not showing them. Once you get the information in there that you're going to want, if you go back over to options, you can visually represent it by doing a pivot chart. And the pivot chart is just going to reflect the information that you have, and it allows you to go through and filter out a little bit to show the details that you need. Because sometimes if you look at this chart, you can't really tell any information from it, you could filter out and show exactly what you're going to need. If there are things that you guys are working on or you do need help with, that's why I give you my email address, because sometimes when we're going through something in a class like this, you're like, oh, okay, that's, a really good idea, and then you actually try to do it, and then a question pops up. So I'll be available during all of our phone calls, and then also if you guys have something in between, you can just shoot me an email.
I have a couple which I'm hoping are going to be quick questions.
Absolutely.
Once you've done your table and you've gotten it to the way you want it to look, if you want to, when you're going to send it out, is there a way to send it so nobody can touch the data? In other words, they can't click on and bring up the pivot table?
So you want to only have them look at this information, and you don't want them to touch it, just look, right?
Right.
Okay. What I would do is lock up the sheet, and then that way they won't be able to. So if I want this sheet 3 to be locked up, if I go over to my Review tab, you'll see Protect Sheet. And what you can do is throw a password on there if you want. So I'm just going to put in 123. And when I click OK, I have to re-enter the password. And now when I go through here, if I try to add or delete anything, this is the message that pops up.
Okay.
And it says that it's protected and it's read-only.
Okay.
So,
now, the second question that I had to that is if I delete the spreadsheet that the table was created from, so that nobody can see that information, does that do anything to the pivot table?
If you delete out this one, when I go back over, it'll still have the information that was in there.
Okay.
So you'll be able to use it. What you might want to try too is if you have a sheet in there and it has a pivot table on it and you want to give somebody just that information, but you don't want the original raw data, what you could do is if it's on its own tab, right-click the tab, choose Move or Copy, and then on this window here, choose Create a Copy, and then choose New Book.
Oh, okay.
And what it'll do is it'll extract out just that one sheet, and then this is the only thing that you're going to send that person. And then you still have the whole other spreadsheet.
Okay, good. And I think, can't you also hide, so can't you hide a tab, and then if you lock the sheet, they wouldn't be able to view?
Absolutely. So if you go back there. You could also, so if we wanted to hide this one, we could right-click it, hide it, and if you don't want them to be able to right-click and unhide, because when you choose unhide, it'll show you all the sheets that are hidden, we could protect the workbook and protect the structure and windows, and what that'll do is not allow you to play with any of the sheets, but will on the sheets. So protect sheets is locking down just the one sheet that you're on and making it a read-only, and protecting workbook allows you to not add or delete tabs or to unhide them.
And I hate
if you hit the tab and protected the workbook, that would do it. And I'm sorry?
Well, how did you can you just show me one more time how you selected this and created the new sheet without cutting and pasting it into, so you took.
Absolutely.
That would be for me to know.
Yeah, so when you're on there, just go down to the bottom, right-click the tab that you want to become a new sheet.
Okay.
Choose Move or Copy. And the one part that sometimes gets left out is there's this little checkbox here that says Create a Copy. I'd recommend you click that because then it leaves the original and then moves a copy of it to a new workbook. And then just choose, this list will have everything you have open. If you choose New Book, then it just opens up a new workbook, and then you can just go to File, Save, and save this workbook.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem. Was there any other questions that you guys had? Okay.
Yeah, and I think they may have provided a little bit more time for Q&A during this particular session than we needed. So, if there's anything that we want to address questions with, or if there's something that comes up after this session, please email me, and I'll put a list together for Brad so that if we do run into the situation again where we have time remaining in any of the subsequent sessions, that we can fill it with those questions. So do you have any additional questions today that you want to address right now, or I'll just leave that offer open where you can email me, and we'll fill other sessions with those questions. Because I think, Brad, you're done covering the actual content you planned on covering today, correct?
Today, and I did want to leave a little extra time just because I knew that there was going to be an intro, and just to make sure that there was no other issues for the first one. So.
Any other questions today? Otherwise, I'll give you back about 19 minutes of your day.
No questions?
No arguments there.
Thank you, everybody. I thought this was a good first session.
Yeah, great session.
Bye. Yeah.
Thank you. And if we need to extend another session to get additional questions in or whatnot, we can do that as well, just to subsequent the time, or to substitute the time, I guess.
Perfect.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much. I think this was very successful today, and I look forward to the next 4 sessions. So thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And Robbie?
Yeah, just go ahead and quit your application share, and I'll